So we're really excited to be here. We have a great panel up here on the screen. We have Priyanka Panda, who is an AI product manager based in Boston. She's had a lot of experience launching 0 to 1 products, managing large-scale programs across industries such as supply chain, fintech, and most recently in insurtech. She's a mentor, coaching, and an aspiring PM. And we have sitting here next to me, Neil Baumer. He's the head of operations and customer success at BizRite. I forgot to mention, Priyanka, your current role is AI product manager at Hosta AI, but head of operations and customer success at BusRite. It's a Series A startup that's modernizing our nation's largest mass transit system, and that is indeed school buses. As one of the earliest employees, he's spent a lot of time with customers and building a team, and his knowledge about the industry is going to bring a lot to this conversation. Neil's background includes working with and investing with pre-seed and student-led companies prior to joining BusRite. And I'm Amory. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Aquabite at the moment, and I'm excited to lead this conversation. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you. And Amory, I feel like you downplayed your background there as a CPO with a lot of experience and knowledge.
It's my role as moderators, highlight you guys, our panelists. So what we'd love to do is start by understanding our audience here so we can tailor it. So we're going to pop a poll up on who's in the room and who's joining us virtually. And I believe, Shaheen, do you have that ready for us?
Yep, the poll
Great.
is live. The poll is indeed live. However, in the room, what we'd like to do is get a show of hands as to who's in the room. So if you are a founder, we'd love to see you raise your hands. Got a lot of founders in the room. That's exactly what we're here to do. Okay. Any product managers? Got a few of those too. We're here for you as well. Anyone in customer success? Great, great, great. Any students? All right. Hey there. And anyone else? Yeah, everyone. Okay. So it's predominantly comprised of product managers and founders in this room right now. Online, we're letting the votes come in, and it looks like we have mostly founders in the room. There are 8 votes for founders with a boatload in the room, and then also 2 product managers online as well as in the room.
Great. Well, I'm excited to see so many founders really interested in understanding how to leverage customer feedback. I think it's one of the most valuable things you can do to drive your business, particularly early on in your strategy. So we thought we would start by talking about how do you find your customers and go about gathering feedback, which is one of the first questions we heard. So Neil, maybe you could start on how do you gather feedback from your customers? Do you use surveys? Do you do one-on-one? Do you use usage data? What kind of tools do you use?
Great question. Do you mind if I take a little hands-on poll one more time before I answer that? As far as stage, are folks pre-seed, seed, Series A, late stage? If you're like pre-seed, idea stage, can I see you raise hands? Gotcha. Seed stage? And then post-seed stage, Series A and beyond? Sweet. Okay, awesome. I think that'll help me tailor my answers a little bit. And to preface all of my answers, I think it's really important to recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. There is no right answer. And then also my background and my experience is really, really specific to B2B, both SMBs and also like really when we work with schools in the world of school buses, it's a little bit more of like kind of an enterprise relationship. So my answers are probably going to be a little bit more tailored to that. I know Priyanka has some great background doing B2C stuff. And so I'll probably just preface all my answers with that kind of context. That's kind of where my experience comes from. But as far as gathering feedback and sources of feedback, I think the most important thing, especially seed, pre-seed stages, is to do things that are not remotely scalable and don't really make that much sense. As far as once you hit Series A, you're gonna have to break it down and start all over again. I think the best source of feedback is going to be having those one-on-one qualitative conversations. I think NPS is great. I think doing your CSAT is great. But I think when especially if you're a B2B company and you have, maybe 100 customers at most, taking a more quantitative approach is going to give you, I think the quantitative approach helps you understand who to talk to. When you have so few customers, it makes a lot of sense to dive really deep in. I think in taking that qualitative one-on-one approach, it's really important to be cognizant of who you're talking to. The loudest voices in the room are rarely going to be representative of your whole customer base. And I think, thinking of my own experience, the loudest 3 school districts or transportation directors we work with are phenomenal and they give great feedback. But something about the fact that they are the ones who want to speak up and the ones who want to have those conversations kind of inherently makes them a little bit unique from most of our other customers. And so the perspectives that they share are rarely aligned with the folks who we actually have to go out and seek and talk to. So the quiet customers often, I think, have the best feedback. And so doing those one-on-one conversations, especially early on, I think is the most important thing you can consistently do.
I love that. I love that, Neil. And thank you so much for polling one more time. I think that definitely helps me understand who the folks are in the room and sort of how to tailor my content. This is a very important question, and this is a very fundamental question. But before we delve into gathering feedback, we must understand why it's really important to even gather feedback. And I kind of wanted to understand from the folks in the room, how do you currently gather feedback? And if you have any suggestions on how you gather it, I'm just curious. Anyone?
We have someone.
Yeah, market validation, just
Mhm.
in terms of, those who are close to you and just getting validation in terms of be the value proposition or the use, function form, etc.
Yeah.
Getting that feedback, just, informally versus more of a formal cycle.
Got it. Awesome. I love that. I think it's so important, market validation for your product and just to know what you're building, right? So in my opinion, why customer feedback is really important here is for a couple of reasons. And I want to hear from the audience if you have heard about this famous phrase or sentence, line, anywhere. It's called as, if you build, they will come. Have you ever, anyone have heard that? Awesome, awesome, awesome. So again, but unfortunately, this is not the case. If you just keep on building your features, if you keep on building your services without getting active customer feedback, I like to call it as a build trap. You're just guessing and assuming things here. So that's why it's really, really critical to gather feedback from your customer for your product or for your service. And another critical reason here that I'd like to point out is that you would actually able to understand what do you need to prioritize, what really matters to your customer. And I think that's why, if you're already not doing so, please start gathering feedback. Now, jumping into how do you actually gather feedback, and there are different feedback channels, and my answer here would be it depends which feedback channels and how do you gather feedback depends. It depends on whether your organization and the kind of KPIs or the goals or the OKRs that you're prioritizing for. It also depends whether your company or organization is B2B or B2C, and what are the most KPIs that you care about. But how I like to bucket customer feedback is into two buckets. And Neil touched base on this earlier, which is qualitative and quantitative. So in terms of qualitative, Neil, which mentioned is direct customer feedback, one-on-one customer interviews. And this is so important. If you are in the phase of launching your product right now, if you have a prototype, I would suggest find your niche market and please go out and reach out to these people and get some feedback before you launch anything. Some of the other qualitative ways to gather feedback is obviously customer support interactions. That's a great tool to understand some of the customers' pain points. Depending on what your product is, the third one that I have for you is social media and forums like Reddit, or it could be reviews of your product or your competitor's product. So that's also some of the ways that you could utilize qualitative feedback. Now, in terms of quantitative feedback? And my answer here, again, it depends where you are in your product development. If you feel you have some user base, I would go ahead and set up some form of analytics to understand how customers are behaving with or interacting with your website. So that could be your heat maps, some sort of analytics. Then another tool or method here would be to A/B test. And this is a classic example that probably, Amory, you might relate with A/B testing, just to see perspective on what colors or what buttons or things like that. If you have a good customer base, you could do that for your websites. I love surveys. That's a great tool always. And then a couple more I have for you is NPS scores. So NPS scores basically tells us 3 categories of people. The people who are promoting, people who are detractors, and people who are neutral. It's a brutal scale to use, so I'd be very, very cautious if you're going for NPS feedback. And then the last one is CSAT. I think a lot of the people probably have interacted with CSAT. You know, if you're, for example, buying food at the end of the delivery, that's like with the emojis, or you could make it very like fun or whatever works for you. So that's my sort of feedback channel that you could use depending.
That's great, Priyanka. Thank you so much for that. We've used NPS sure too with consumers. I found that to be a really great thing to track trends over time as opposed to a point in time. So you're improving or not improving. And I think people really want to hear your personal experience on what you're using right now. I'm going to ask Neil, both of you really emphasize the importance of one-on-one relationships. How do you go about building those relationships with your customers today so that you trust and get honest feedback from them on how you're doing, as opposed to sort of it's good or yeah, it's okay, which is not the depth of feedback you need. How do you build those relationships?
Absolutely. I'm going to add 2 quick notes on the last point, just super quickly, as far as qualitative versus quantitative. I think, especially if you're like early days building your seed stage, you know, V1 went out, I think building a culture of knowing you're going to move towards quantitative things in the future and building those things, throw Google Analytics in there. It can be messy as hell. But the fact that you then get to your Series A and now you have to start looking at things a little bit more quantitatively, and then you have to kind of redo things from scratch or re-implement things or shift culture on the team as a whole is a little bit more challenging later on. And I think planting those seeds really early on is helpful. And then the second thing I just wanted to say is NPS, CSAT, like you can toil over these things all day. I've looked at one CSAT question for 8 hours trying to figure out how to optimize this thing so it actually reflects what I want to be hearing. Nobody is holding you to gunpoint to share the results that you get. Just do it. Just like, don't overthink it. You might get crappy responses. You might have to re-optimize it next time for your first few times, for your first several times. Just do it. Just send out the questions, send out the survey, and don't overthink it. That's something that I think I've struggled with several times is I want to get this question perfect, especially for quantitative feedback, because, everyone's going to see it. And the reality is overthinking it will slow you down so much. And it's better to just do the thing, launch the thing, get the feedback, tweak it next time. So I just wanted to throw those 2 things in the ring there. As far as like how you actually build those relationships and building trust with users, I think that most of customer success is like stupidly intuitive, and overthinking it is a really, really common challenge and one I run into all the time. But I think that most of the times our users are way smarter than we give them credit for, and they're just people. And I think the same way that you go about building trust with any other person, whether it's a new friend that you're going to meet or a new colleague, is the same way that you can build trust with your users to know that they're going to give you honest feedback. I think it's having those really open, candid conversations. I think it's being really, really open to listening to what they have to say. I think most of the times when somebody's just a number at a company and they don't feel heard, they're going to be significantly less open to sharing feedback. If you make sure that they feel heard, I think right off the bat, you're going to have a stronger relationship. And I think this like stupidest, most obvious one is just treat your users like they're human, whether you're the CEO of the company or the head of customer success or the head of product. Send them an email back, be friendly, be kind. And the response that you get and the shift when you switch from your like hyper corporate tone to just a quick, hey, and a cheers at the end is really, really drastic. And I think if you do that to start, and then I'll talk about this, maybe a little bit more later, is like if you actually then act on that feedback and follow up with that person the first time they give you feedback, if they know that even if you couldn't build the thing or you couldn't fix that bug, if you follow up 6 months later and let them know, hey, this isn't off our radar. Hey, we're this is still on our team's mind. We can't build it just yet, but we're thinking about it. Thanks for sharing this feedback a while ago. If you're able to follow up, they know they matter. They know they're heard. They're going to be so much more open to sharing and taking their time to share next time, and they're going to feel valued.
Neil, I love the making sure your customers feel heard and also prioritizing making time to respond to them in a really personal way. Those are great. Making sure we get through our agenda here. I'm going to move on to interpreting feedback. And Priyanka, I'd love to start with you here on, can you give some examples of times where you've gotten conflicting customer feedback? One customer loves something, another customer says this is not at all what we need. And how do you manage that when you get it?
Yeah, I love that question. I love that question. And I think that happens more so than often. So I think I would love to reiterate what Neil just mentioned here, just reaching out to them, understanding what exactly are they looking for. For example, a recent example from my previous company is a field specialist reached out with a certain type of feedback saying, we love it. But the VP of the company reached out saying that there's so many still improvements that we need. What we need isn't here. And I think it's, first of all, understanding who is the feedback coming from. I think that's the most important thing, to understand what their motivations are. I think that's going to be really, really helpful here. And once you figure out their motivations, their behavior and usage, I basically love to just reach out to them through email or schedule a call with them and understand what their true pain points are. And sometimes you kind of have to delve deeper into understanding what their real customer pain points are. So asking the right questions here would definitely help. And again, it depends on what the product or the feature is, but I just go out, ask them the right questions, and go out and be there to listen. Just be there to listen, show the empathy, and understand their pain points. That's how I prioritize some of these conflicting feedbacks.
Neil, how about you? Can you give an example of when you've heard that and what you did with it?
Absolutely. I think we get this every day, and like the reality is that you're going to have different profiles of users and customers who have different needs, especially as if you're in B2B, as you move up market, a small business needs going to look super different from an enterprise, and you're going to be spending time on things that one of them doesn't care about. For us, we build school bus technology. And part of that is driver navigation. This tablet that sits on the bus gives them like your Waze or your Google Maps for school buses. It's dynamic navigation, so it reroutes. So when driver A takes a wrong turn, it reroutes and it sends them a new way to the next stop. And some districts absolutely love that. There's too much traffic, reroute me. My drivers, my subs on these buses take wrong turns every day, absolutely reroute them. And that's core and fundamental to our product, that dynamic navigation. And then the other half of the school districts come back to us and say, absolutely not. These drivers should only be ever following the exact planned route. And you look at that and you're like, all right, where do we put our resources? Can we satisfy both of these things? And I think most of the times the answer is, with enough resources or resources put in the right place, we can probably satisfy both of these people. May take a lot of time, may take a lot of understanding from them, but maybe there's a way that we can either rework one person's understanding to make sure they're satisfied, or to make sure they're okay with the fact that we're not delivering on something, or we can satisfy both of them. I think the other thing is being really comfortable saying no. And I think understanding who is your ideal customer profile today. I think especially the earlier stage you're going to start with that beachhead. For us, it was smaller school districts. And now we're moving to medium, larger size school districts, and understanding who's your ICP today. And then we like to use the phrase aspirational customer profile. Who's that customer that we want to be going after 6 to 12 months from now? And what's going to help us satisfy this ICP while also moving towards this aspirational customer profile? And if the thing that the person's unhappy about doesn't fit both, it's okay to say no. And I think, again, users and customers are a lot more dynamic and understanding than we often give them credit for. And I think having a really honest conversation with them about, hey, can't build this right now. Here's why. Here's what we're focused on instead that might delight you. Maybe it won't, but here's what we're working on instead. They understand almost all of the time. I've rarely come across a case, it's certainly a few cases where they're like, absolutely not, we're going to have to leave. And that's fine. They don't fit in your ideal customer profile, your aspirational customer profile. But most of the time, if you have that really honest and candid conversation with them and they understand what other value they might get, they're pretty open to it, I find.
Neil, I love that sequencing you talked about who your early adopters are and how you're going to move forward from that. I'll share a story at Hydro where I was. It's a at-home rowing machine. The early adopters there were really serious rowers and really serious athletes. But if you're going to dramatically expand, you need to find a way to reach people more like myself, where working out is a chore I do every day, not the thing I look forward to and not the center of my existence. And so you can imagine the features there being really different on what those customers might ask for. But early on, making sure that people who believed in rowing were excited about it and were going to go promote it, loved the product, was really important. And as we expanded the number of users, starting to focus more in a more balanced way on competitive rowers versus I would say average athletes or people for whom working out is not an athletic pursuit, but a health pursuit, became really important for us. So I love that. Back to you, Priyanka. How do you decipher the quality of the information and response you're getting from customers? So you talked a little bit about diving in and understanding pain points as a way to prioritize, but is every customer's feedback, do you weight it the same, or are some people's feedback just lower quality and not worth your time?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. And feedback is essential for learning, improving your product and service. But if I were to tell you I received a feedback from a 5-year-old versus an adult, and this is an application or product which is not meant for children, so whose feedback are you going to be taking or considering, right? And why? So one way to sort of like filter out the noise and understand the quality of the feedback is to consider who is giving you the feedback and why. Understanding different sources, have different perspectives and motivations and expectations. So that's what I think the first step is, to understand who is giving you the feedback. Another way is to just clarify sometimes, because all feedback might not be complete, might be vague. So go out to these customers who are giving you feedback. And if you feel, and Neil mentioned this earlier, just sending an email out or reaching out to them, just ask the question if you feel there is a deep insight there. So I think those are some of the ways that I'd go about. And again, when you receive this feedback, this could be qualitative, try to be able to convert that into quantitative, so that, for example, you have 7 out of 70 customers talking about price. So, okay, that means there is something that you could talk about or look into those product insights much deeper. And that's how I'd go from there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Neil, is there ever a time you can add to that answer, but also would you include, is there ever a time you should absolutely just disregard feedback that you're receiving?
I think that I wouldn't use the word disregard. I think that take the feedback, tell the person you appreciate them, and then log it somewhere. I think one of the worst things you can do is not document the thing. I don't think it's ever worth disregarding. I think that one of the better things that a product and CS team can collaborate on, especially early days, is acknowledging the reality that like you need to focus as a product team, and your engineering teams need to focus and have this space to focus on what you think is critical to build. And I think that a lot of times the feedback that can come in can either feel like it might be valuable, but a lot of times it can feel like a distraction to the product and engineering team, or we didn't hear about that tiny little bug, or we didn't want to hear about that feature because now all the engineers are thinking about it and it was a distraction. And I think that a kind of a long way of answering your question, I think that something really valuable that product teams can do with their customer success teams is make sure CSMs understand what product's focus is, and then make sure that there's a mutual understanding of what we're focusing on, why we're focusing on it, and what do we want the CS team to filter out. So the idea that, okay, now our CSMs, our customer experiences managers, whoever's on the ground dealing with customers, sales team, whatever, has a very clear understanding of we are not necessarily looking to take action on these 5 types of features right now, these buckets, anything that falls outside of XYZ buckets, unless it's a critical deal or the customer's about to churn. Now we don't have to filter intake. So the CSM still get all this feedback. They log it into Product Board or whatever tool, or Notion, or whatever tool you want to use, but it doesn't have to distract the product team or engineering team if it's not immediately relevant, and they can go look back at it later. I don't think it's worth ever like chopping off intake, but I think training the people at the front lines to understand how and when to filter things that are not going to be relevant for the moment is really valuable.
Right. I love that, Neil. And just to add my perspective here in terms of disregarding customer feedback, and my short answer is never. Customer feedback is a data point, and it's an important source of information that you can use to build your organization's future. So feedback can help you improve your product, enhance your services, or let you know how you are even perceived in the marketplace. But here, the point here is that what you do and when you act on that customer data or the feedback is up to you. So I'd say never disregard a feedback, but like Neil mentioned, log it somewhere, and then you can always prioritize it when you need it to, depending on which customers you're targeting and what features you're trying to prioritize in your roadmap.
Great. I think this is a great segue into kind of the meat of this, which is how do you use the feedback once you've got it? And Priyanka, maybe you could start on this, on how do you translate feedback that you get into actionable formats for the rest of the organization? Yeah. So I think Neil alluded to this on customer success can be a filter on what they emphasize when they give in, but how do you, when you're getting feedback, translate that?
Yeah, I love that. So whether you're using NPS survey or whether you're using qualitative feedback or something else, if you do not relay it and prioritize it to your stakeholders or point of contact person in the company, what's the point, right? So in terms of what I have done previously in my organization is depending who you're talking to. For example, if you're talking you're taking some feedback, and if you're talking to an engineer, for example, one of the time was we had a lot of customers on our website, and we started to analyze that there might be some slow website traffic and people experiencing a lot of lag. So how do I take that feedback and talk to my engineers? So I'm going to talk in terms of a little bit more technical language about like, hey, we need to work upon the latency for this particular website or whatever the case may be. Versus if you're talking to customer service or if you're talking to sales, I would give them more context and background about why this has happened and how we're resolving it. Versus if you're talking to a CEO, I'd keep my communication very, very brief. Yeah, I hope that helps folks.
Neil, how about you? Either that, or how do you use to make decisions internally? How does your organization sort of take it in and make it actionable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is ever changing. I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges, especially as we scale our customer base, scale our team. Engineers have to be a little bit more siloed, a little bit more focused. So we're kind of revisiting this right now, and I think it's going to be a challenge that exists forever. But I think that one of the things that our product team does really well that I like is, one, they make sure that we in customer success have very clear context so we can be that filter. And then 2 is everything on our roadmap is tied to 3 business goals. One of them is either the 3 are, I think, if I'm remembering the language correctly, we do increasing retention, increasing our average sales price, or pushing us towards our ASP, or aspirational ACP customer profile, so like slightly larger districts. And if it doesn't fall into those 3, other than in some rare exception cases where the customer is going to churn or massive deal we're missing for whatever reason falls into one of those buckets, we kind of know to pretty quickly disregard it. And I think having that level of focus, once you've either reached product market fit or are approaching product market fit, I think like focus as a theme is really, really important, because it will be very hard to get anything done if your product team is not super focused, if they don't communicate that focus to the rest of the team, to CS, to the engineering team, because it's so easy to get distracted by all the noise and all the different feedback that you're going to get. So I think tying everything back to focus is like a pretty built-in filter. And if everyone knows what those focuses are, I think that's really helpful as well.
Totally agree. I think the organizations that do that well scale faster than the ones that don't. I'll just give a practical one on this. If you do a survey where you send out and you get a lot of qualitative feedback, I have found it really useful to assign someone to go through that and kind of bucket into categories of what are people commenting on. You can't necessarily do that in advance. If you could have done that, you would have made it a survey of answer like which of these 3 things. So like we did at the beginning, we had an other category. If there'd been a lot of you who hadn't raised your hands, we would have needed to dig in there. And then you can kind of evolve that as you go through it. So I have found that making also the raw feedback available to anyone in your company who really wants to see it, so they don't see your filter, but also filtering it for the people who don't have time or have learned to trust you into some sort of, here's the categories of things we're getting, can be a really useful way to make it actionable rather than overwhelming. I think synthesizing information is time consuming, and not everyone in the organization. As you said, you don't want every engineer reading every comment from a customer. You want some people whose job it is to say, these are the ones
You want it
really
to be
look at.
available, but not pushed in their face. And now you just throw all of it into ChatGPT and it'll synthesize the feedback for you and give you some buckets.
Yeah. To that point, Priyanka, does the source of the material or the information you're getting from customers or the method that you use to collect it affect how you turn it into actionable things or how you use it?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. And I'm going to go back to one of the examples that I used previously. This was a time when I was working with our field adjusters, and we got like a crazy comment from them. And then that escalated to the CEO. And everybody was tensed in the company and we don't know what was happening. So trying to figure out what was happening in the first place, the VP gave a totally different feedback and the field adjuster gave a totally different feedback. So I think the first thing that you do here is to reach out to these folks and understand what their customer pain points are and where is that feedback coming from, and just understand and listen to them. Once you do that, you get the context of how this has happened, where this has happened. And once you get that context, then try and prioritize. So here is an example how you can prioritize as well. The CEO might say, hey, we need to get this feature implemented right away because it's hurting our customers. Now, that's when you come in and put your product customer centric hat on and understand, okay, how is this going to, if I were to launch this feature, who is it affecting within my organization, how it's affecting within my organization? Is it short term that I can ask my engineers to build something really quickly? Or if I should basically go ahead and build it. So look it into perspective of long term and short term, what value it's bringing to your organization in short term as well as long term. And then basically don't be a project manager, try to be put your customer centric and product and business hat on and understand how it's going to move the needle for you. Talk with your VP, talk with different sources that you've gathered feedback from, and from there on I would suggest prioritizing. So one of the examples was that it was the most critical feature that was needed for our field adjusters, and we didn't have that. So how is it affecting my other customers? That's the question I asked. And absolutely, it would be helpful for other customers to gain value to the business as well. So in that case, we went ahead and worked and prioritized that feature. So again, keep in mind who this feedback is coming from, what are the sources, try to filter it out, gather insights, reach out to them, and then decide what needle is going to move for your business, and then take a decision. So I would say it absolutely definitely matters who the feedback is coming from. So yeah.
Great. Thank you for those insights. The next few questions we got are around the type of feedback. So Neil, have you gotten specific positive feedback, and what steps can you take to strengthen the relationship with that customer? We'd love maybe a specific example from Busride on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to revisit 2 things I said prior and then answer that question. The last answer I gave around focus, I think I want to caveat, just can't get out of my mind. That makes a lot of sense if you've either, again, reaching product market fit, you know what you need to focus on. If you're in discovery mode, please don't focus and filter a bunch of stuff out because it's all going to be pretty valuable. But that comment, I guess, was a little bit more geared towards folks who have an understanding of, okay, here's what's going to move the needle for us and drive us forward. And then one other piece that I forgot to mention was like one of the things that was really helpful for us early on was we had design partners. A lot of folks will do like the customer advisory board or the customer advocacy group, having people who are bought in on a regular basis, a regular source of information and feedback for especially like as you're in discovery mode or building out a lot of the like base functionality of your product, I think is really, really valuable. And I think in designing a design partner group or a customer advocacy board or customer advisory board, it's really important to like think about structure. Again, like the loudest people in the rooms are going to jump at, let me give you feedback. I've got a ton of it. I've got a bunch of feature ideas, but you really have to question whether they are representative of the majority of your customer base, and then be really intentional about going to the person who's never giving you feedback or who's quiet and happy, or quiet and pissed, and you have no idea, and going and seeking out those sources of information, especially if they're going to be as impactful as like a design partner group. Okay, back to the question that was totally unrelated. Sorry. Specific examples of positive feedback, and then how we've strengthened the relationship with those folks. I guess it does tie to design partner groups. I think that when you find folks who are aligned with what you're building and excited about what you're building, capitalize on that momentum. Don't let them give you a great, oh, this is awesome, and then like fizzle out. I think there's a few things that you can do. It's a really, really stupid example, but like merch I love merch. And I think that merch, especially if you're not serving a tech-focused industry, nobody is giving school bus drivers merch. Nobody's giving the transportation director a hat or a notebook or whatever it might be. And I think it has the ability to sort of build a feeling of belongingness and community. And I think that when somebody shares that positive feedback, capitalize on that momentum, bring them into your design partner group, have them come talk to your team, share that customer love with the rest of your engineering team. If you're lucky enough to be on the ground talking to customers every day, you're selling customers every day, or you're selling prospects or talking to existing customers, it's really important to remember that like your engineering team might not be that lucky, or what you see is like dreadful because this customer is going to yell at you today. The engineering team might not have the opportunity to talk to that customer. And the fact that I hear, oh, great, you saved me 30 minutes today, or I love your new multi-view tool, which is a routing tool we built, 10 times a day, our engineering team doesn't hear that unless we tell them. And so we might be a little bit numb to some of the great or the bad feedback, but the rest of the team isn't. And the way that can energize people across the team to see the impact that their work is having on a real person's day is unbelievable. So I think it's had a really big impact on team culture to share those things, but also to make sure the customer knows how much they're impacting our team. So, this Friday we have a call with a customer from Arizona who's going to come in and just do a fireside chat with our team. And we've been doing these every week so that our entire team can hear customer feedback in real time, hear customers appreciate them, crap on certain features, that's fine. But they can hear this for themselves. And then the customer now knows how much we appreciate them and how much we appreciate their feedback. So like all of those things, and also going back to the point of just like treating them like humans makes a big difference.
That's great. And then Priyanka, have you ever received generally negative feedback, and how did you recover or respond to that when you got something great and the feedback was like, no, it's not what we needed, or it isn't working for us?
Absolutely, yes. Negative feedback is something everyone tries to run away from, but I think it's could be a great tool to understand where you need to make improvements for your product or your service, and within organization, and that could be a culture as well. So yes, we have received negative feedback. In terms of how you would go about making it right or wrong, so first of all, I treat them as a human. Obviously, they are in the situation and they're angry. So understand their emotion first. Once you understand that, try and listen, be there for them. Sometimes you can pacify situation with maybe some gift card or compensate for their time. So that's some of the ways that I've used in the past to sort of diffuse the situation first. So that's a couple things that I'd go about, and tell them that you're there for them and you're a part of solution. and you're not a part of problem, and that you're working really hard on it. And once they're pacified, once they understand the situation, give them a little bit of context of what might have went wrong. So people like to hear what you're working on and how hard you're working. So I think just be there, tell them you're part of the solution and you're working really hard on it, and make sure you follow up with them before and after. I think that's really important. A lot of the people usually miss on closing the loop, and that's really, really important and critical when it comes to negative feedback and diffusing it.
Great. I love that both of you have also highlighted how both positive or negative feedback might impact your broader team and your organizations, along with how you're handling it with the customer. Neil, do you have anything to add on negative feedback?
I think the point Priyanka brings up here about closing the loop is really important. I can't think of like the number of times, and a lot of this is like specific to a lot of what I mentioned specific to SaaS, but I think this applies elsewhere as well. The number of times I've reported a bug or an issue, or I've had a poor experience, and how few times I'll get the Zendesk response that says, "Hey, we got your ticket." Maybe somebody will follow up and say, "Hey, thanks for letting us know. We're looking into it." And more often than not, 9 months will go by, a year goes by, and just like never acknowledged. Maybe 2 years later, like I'll log back into the product and it's fixed and it's great. But you're not making me feel anything by not mentioning it for 2 years, or not acknowledging it, or not closing the loop, or not making me feel like I've been heard. And I think that's the most important thing here, is just thinking about, if you were in this customer's position, how would you feel and how would you want to be treated? I feel like a lot of customer success is like great kindergarten rules of like, treat others how you want to be treated. And I think it's really important to know that, okay, if that customer reported feedback, like Priyanka said, give them the context, make sure you understand, make sure you hear them out, make sure you empathize with the crappy day they're having because XYZ broke. And then follow up 3 months later, follow up 6 months later, set a reminder for yourself to follow up a year once everything is fixed, or every 6 months, let them know again that, hey, this is still on our radar. This is really important to us. And then also don't be afraid to say no, right? If it's, thanks for letting us know, we're not planning on building this, or we're not planning on, that's a customer. We're not planning on focusing on this part of the platform. I totally understand how this has a negative impact on your experience, and I've flagged it to our product team. I know that it's going to be 6 to 9 months before we get to it, but here's what else we're building in the meantime. Also, don't lead them on if you're not going to get to it for 6 to 9 months. Just be upfront about it. I think has been really, really valuable. And again, I think giving customers and users a lot more credit for how understanding they can be if we give them the right information.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Neil.
Wrap this up so we can move on to the audience questions, and then we can do a roundup at the last 5 minutes.
Awesome. Sounds good.
So maybe we take 10 minutes and do some questions from the audience. I see we have a couple coming back through the chat here, but we can open it up here as well. People have questions for the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the cadence of one in-person question and one virtual question.
Great.
Right now I see one virtual question. So what we'll do is we'll start with that. But what I want to do is let y'all think about what you want to maybe talk about. One question I also have for our panel here today is, oftentimes go-to-market teams and customer success teams will work together to reach out to their current client base as a retention tactic. What I want to know is, for our panel, how often do you think you're supposed to reach out to your current client base? You don't want to over saturate them with emails, but how often you do it, and how do you kind of position that certain email or outreach?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think depends on your stage, depends on how many customers you have. I am a huge fan of over communication. I think that, frankly, I was reaching out like every week, if not every 2 weeks, very early on. It's a little bit less now, but I think that people will tell you if they want things to slow down, or, hey, you can ask straight up, do you want me to email you a little bit less? But giving them the option to hear from you frequently, to check in frequently. A lot of times I think, users will have issues, things they're working around that they don't need to be working around, challenges, bugs that you can fix, you can solve for them. And I think over communicating is a good thing. And then I think having a controversial, but like a point of contact who does that, who can be reliable and consistent. It's annoying when 30 different people reach out to you from the same company every 2 weeks. And so making sure that you have a little bit of process and structure to that outreach is important, but I think more frequently than not.
Very much agree.
I would say at a minimum weekly is how often we contact our customers. Some of that is with a large customer base and email, but with B2B, with a few customers that you're building relationships with, our customer success team touches base with them at least weekly, even if it's just here's how things are going. Do you want to have a call? What's happening with you? So that's been my experience, particularly early on until you get into a steady state. Priyanka, do you want to add anything to that?
But I think you covered it pretty much there. I don't have anything to add.
Great.
Before we move on to the first question, I realized I didn't give you an example of like negative customer feedback. I have two good ones that I'll keep pretty brief. There's a driver, Bob, if folks are from Massachusetts, in North Reading, Massachusetts. I would go to a bus lot every morning at 5 a.m. and he would curse me out every morning, just like the most vile things you've ever heard, because he did not want to use technology. He was 85 or like 82 or something. Surprised he was driving a bus, but he absolutely hated me. He hated the idea of technology. And I just want to go back to this idea of like treating people like humans. Bob was also like mistreated by his employer. He was never heard out. Nobody ever wanted to listen to what Bob had to say. So I'd sit there and I'd buy Bob donuts and let him curse me out. And over the course of 2 years, Bob now, whenever his tablet isn't working, calls me and says, "You get me another tablet right now because I need this thing now." And he's become reliant on the product. I think a lot of negative feedback and like strong negative feedback that impacts their perception of the product of the company as a whole just can come from like initial perceptions that they have. And if you can break down those walls, you kind of win. And then one other example was Harris County, Georgia, one of our largest customers, and their router, who was not, we didn't get buy-in from the router because the executive made the decision, hated us. She said, she would text me every morning, "I hate this thing. I hate this thing. I hate this thing." A pretty like rare situation, but she just felt absolutely not heard or validated at all because her employer made a decision that affects her every day without even remotely consulting her. And again, going back to this like stupid, simple, treat people like human thing, I bought her a birthday cake. I bought her son a Christmas gift. And now she like absolutely adores it. It's still little things. Obviously, we improved the product experience along the way, but nobody's going to be open to that if you're not able to break down those walls to start.
Great. Should we move to the questions?
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to start with a virtual question here. So. Okay, so for the room, it's obviously small, so I'll read it out loud. So what are some of the key differences in having your clients be part of the public sector, e.g. public school districts?
I'm gonna guess that one's for me. All right, I'd say some of the biggest differences is they are sometimes a little less resourced. I actually don't think there's all that many differences. More often than not, I find that they are more interested in finding success with whatever you are offering. Sometimes you'll have a group that's a little bit more disengaged, but the reality is like most folks in the public sector aren't getting paid what they deserve, and they're there because they want to be there. The amount of passion that comes from like transportation departments and school districts is mind-blowing. And so there aren't all that many differences, at least in my experience. Although people think like sales cycles are going to be crazy long, it's not all that bad. So I guess I'll leave it at that. Not all that many differences, except they're less heard. People rarely get feedback from teachers or feedback from your public school janitor or transportation professional. They're like very kind of stuck in a back closet and do their thing.
Yeah, I think just to add one more point there, I'd just say like one thing that comes to mind is working with some of the clients who are part of public sector, the response cycle might be a little slow versus in a fast-paced startup organization. So I think that's the key difference I feel, but pretty much I don't think there is any differences between the product or anything else, but that's
also not like
how I feel.
DoD, so I'm not sure about that.
I say regulatory, like
Yeah.
the regulations with which they
Right.
operate in is something you need to understand if you're dealing with the public sector. That might
Yeah.
not apply when you're dealing with companies. All right, let's go to the room.
Okay, in audience question.
Hi, my name is Jason Marmillion. Question is, customer feedback comes from like a lot of different channels. It's not all going to hit your customer success organization. So you have like a lot of likely just streams coming in. And then you also mentioned acting as kind of a filter and what goes out. I'd like to learn a little bit more about where your philosophy is in terms of like what the organization is supposed to do. Are you kind of like a provider of the information that you think people need in like a packaged format? Are you a database host, providing access to a large amount of information that all the rest of the company can organize? Like, how do you see your organization?
That's specifically customer success, Jason?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll give one way that we've organized that at a couple of companies I've been at is a regular voice of the customer meeting or a customer value meeting that customer success and product work together on an agenda for that. They talk about what feedback they've been hearing because they're the two and people dealing with existing customers usually as opposed to prospects. And then present data on that theme and then tell people where they can get more information if there's something around it. So we did onboarding as an example. How's onboarding going for customers? Here's all the feedback we're hearing about onboarding for new customers, unboxing. Here's where the problems are. Here's where they get stuck. 1 month we did that and invite as many people in the organization as want to sit in and hear about that. So that is one way to sort of combine and sort of think through is to pick stages of the customer journey to present on and kind of organize around that. And then if people are doing something, knowing they can come to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about designing a new way of this screen on the thing on how they find this information. Which customers are you working with that might be interested in helping us with this aspect of the product or this detail of the design is another way that you interact. But you run customer success.
Yeah.
You want to jump in there?
I think great question. I'd say it kind of like, I think there's like the perfect world answer, which isn't really all that relevant. I think it really depends on where are the bottlenecks and where is there bandwidth in your organization. I think some orgs are like, or even just some, points in your life cycle, you're going to have very little product bandwidth. And so customer success might have to be more of a filter, which has certainly happened to us at times. And then at other times, like products like we're in discovery mode. Let us get notifications about every single piece of feedback that comes in. I will say like one of the things we're really intentional about is making sure that we're never like a wall. We want to be able to, give you that filtered view if you need it of, hey, things we're raising up that may be important based on what you've shared as, your focus as a product team, but never, hey, you don't have access to all the feedback somebody's giving. I think that like restricting that access can be a little dangerous because sometimes the CS filter might be wrong. We're not, product people.
So there's actually a great question on the virtual stuff. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so I'm going to read it out loud.
So, I don't know how to say your name, but Avinia, she says, I have a question. We are planning to launch new tools on our platform and would like to invite customers to participate in a survey to test out our new products and UI design. Please advise on how to engage these users. They've already sent out emails, but they're getting a low and open response rate. So essentially, we want to know, how do I get my new testing in front? How do I get that email opened? What other tactics do you have? They've offered a $25 credit for their product, but that often doesn't get utilized. So are there any other tactics that you might use?
Priyanka, would you like to jump in on this one first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of things that comes to mind here is, have you thought about the subject of your email? I think having amazing hook that actually wants to make people open an email is going to be critical here. If there are anything else that comes to mind is just try Googling about usertesting.com. There are some platforms that offer some moderated and unmoderated testing. So I think that can be really, really helpful. And just reach out to friends and family, honestly. Ask them to give feedback. I think that's the most easiest one. Yeah.
We found also that offering the chance to win a gift card can sometimes be draw more people in than credit on the service you already offer. That can be a pretty low cost because you're only giving away one. That can drive up some if that's the method you're using. And I think also if you have customers, a personal note. So how personal does the email that you're sending out appear to them? If is it coming from a specific person in customer success, or the customer success team can change response rates and open rates on
How much is that gift card?
We have done everything from $25 to $300. So I think it depends on your budget. And yeah, and your audience. We've driven it up when we were getting lower and lower responses, but we've tried all of those.
Makes sense. Okay. And we have an in-audience question from this gentleman here. What's your name, sir?
Hey there, my name is Louis Cherniano. I'm from Winchester, Mass.
Winchester uses bus right.
Yeah, do they?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, I don't get stuck behind them that often, so all right, good. When you're in the discovery phase, I'm in the direct-to-consumer world as a travel application, planning and saving. When you're in the discovery phase, is it best to have repeat feedback from the same users that seem passionate about the platform, or should we be switching them out on a regular basis, combination of both, board, group meeting, or?
Yeah, I think go ahead, Emery.
I really think that depends on the strategy you have and the stage company you're in on defining who you're trying to target. So in the discovery phase, casting the broadest net possible is really important, and then kind of zeroing in on who do we think we can serve the best out of that net, and then iterating as you go through that on who. So the example I gave earlier, rowing enthusiasts is who we're targeting first. We cast this broad net, we took the product out, we had general consumers walking by trying it out, but we're looking for people who've had experience with a rowing machine first, and that's who we're going to iterate with. And then the next phase was, okay, if we're going to actually grow at the rates for our goal, we're going to need to get beyond that because that market's this big, the general fitness market's this big. And so how do we then target people who work out regularly, not people who don't work out at all, but people who work out on machines at the gym and try to convince them that rowing machines is where they want to work to. And so sequencing that, but initially anyone was the feedback, and then saying this is who we can serve the best because they're answering the questions that we are able to respond to right now. Priyanka, what do you want to add?
Just FYI, we have to close the session very soon. So
yeah.
Priyanka, if we could get your quick hits on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. I'm really passionate about customer discovery. So one of the things that I have utilized in the past is once you cast that wide net, try and understand and focus on your niche, because those are the people who actually care about your product. Those are the people who will give you the correct feedback. And once you start speaking with them one-on-one, or whether through user research or whatever the case might be, a theme might start to emerge, and then that's where you need to look at, and then that's where you can focus on what the next opportunity would be, and then what are some of the other customers that you might need to talk to. So I think I would just say that go talk to customers, find out the theme or anything that you can find, a common theme, and then just go from there. And
Great. I think we are exactly 1 minute over. So thank you all for that. And thanks for the great questions and engagement here in the room and online. Thank you to both our panelists, Neil and Priyanka. It was an honor to be
Thank
up
you,
here
folks.
with you.
thank
Can we
you
get a
so
round of
much.
applause for Amory, Neil, and Priyanka?